James Bridle, born in 1980, is an English author, artist, and technologist who studied computer science and cognitive science and wrote his dissertation on creative applications of AI. Bridle prefers they, them pronouns when referring to self, which makes some sense after reading his 2022 book, Ways of Being. Their writings have appeared in media such as The Wired, Domus, The Atlantic, and others, and they have written regularly for The Observer and The Guardian. The new aesthetic concept, not to be confused with the new aesthetics, Bridle coined the term of, refers to the blending of the virtual and the physical in our world, following the increasing presence of the digital technologies, a Virgo or Libra. Bridle points out that the development of AI has been led primarily by capitalist companies, and that has led us to think that it can only have that kind of intelligence. However, if we look, we can see the different forms of intelligence exhibited by non-humans whose lives are intricately bound with ours. The human-centered approach has led to domination and destruction, and decentralizing would lead to a more just and regenerative path. There are many ways of doing intelligence because intelligence is an active process, not just a mental capacity. The testing of animal intelligence and machines have been mostly human-oriented, yet criteria for those tests are not even met consistently among humans either. Here mentioning the theory of mind, which is about the ability to think about the inner lives of others, to imagine their mental states and to act accordingly. Cephalopods are without a centralized brain, and trees and fungi and wood wide webs exchange food and information. Bridle says we can begin with looking at our similarities to understand non-humans, and that studying them in their context, environment is paramount, as opposed to in captivity. And AI is now in a corporate environment, and for it to evolve differently, this ecology needs to be altered. An example here is from an experiment Monica Galliano did with Mimosa pudica, where she showed the plant's capability to learn from experience, alter behavior as a result, and recall later. So we realize that a different mechanism has also evolved in some other way to arrive at memory. Bridle also says that most non-humans are so radically different from us that we need to accept that they are not totally knowable to us. Living with this unknowability means that all we really can and should do is act with solidarity and trust that we in the world will be able to function in a complex and ever-changing landscape where we have no control. Radical otherness is the driver of adaptability. Natural selection and competition is not the only force in shaping life, but randomness, which is not caused by pressure from the environment, plays at least a just as large role. Biological randomness occurs more frequently in smaller creatures. Larger and more complex forms see a decrease in internal randomness, yet the complexity of their social relations with others increases. Bridle cites examples from ancient and contemporary political practices where random representation led to creative results. The inclusion and equal participation of each and every member of a network is crucial in the functioning of the whole. Encounters mediated by chance produce knowledge, distribute power, and elevate all. What we perceive as borders and conflicts often turn out not to be artifacts of the exterior world, but immeasurable gaps in our own conceptions, abilities, and tools of discernment. The nature of life is not constancy, but change. The driver of change at the level of the individual and at the level of evolution is the encounter with the other. So instead of thinking intelligence as a brain trapped inside a skull, we need to also consider the input from the outside. Therefore, connection and adaptation are necessary. Trees and plants are in constant motion. The white spruce can move over 100 kilometers in a decade, but this information is hidden from us unless we study them over time. Seeing does not mean knowing or dominating. Bridle talks about the problems that arise in courts regarding non-humans, saying we need to recognize their otherness and shape laws accordingly. Animal tracking has made it possible to define metapopulations among them, whose mobility, freedom, and connectedness ensure better survival. And such tracking over time gives us better perspective on how their intelligence works, not in human terms, but in their own territory with their own particular solutions. With the example of agromining, Bridle concludes that when we set out to find less destructive ways of finding what we needed in the earth, we discovered that the plants had got there before us, and one day together, we might build something even better. This book has a point to make, so it is understandable that it is emphasizing solidarity in relationships while discrediting individualness. What matters resides in relationships rather than things between us, rather than within us. Yet I am not convinced that a singular approach is appropriate. Individuality along with sociality, inner with outer, alone with together, seem closer to our reality as humans, and probably for non-humans as well. Brittle does on one occasion say, an organism creates its own umwelt, but also continually reshapes it in its encounter with the world. Everything is unique and entangled. However, his emphasis just about everywhere else is on relationships between individuals. There is only nature, in all its eternal flowering, creating microprocessors and data centers and satellites, just as it produced oceans, trees, magpies, oils, and use. As idyllic as this sounds, and I actually agree with it, I am baffled when someone who writes this turns around and talks about Anthropocene, which is about still assuming human is, or at least capable of being, superior. If that is possible, then there is no possibility of ever being one. Ignore the evil and ensure the evil. And my question is unanswered. Does the rabbit consider me? This is not a question with merely selfish expectations. Maybe indifference is the better attitude than charity. And how much charity for solidarity could cause overcrowding and such problems? Maybe how rabbit does it could show the way. It would be easy to pick this book apart for all its contradictions and visions that largely ignore the evil and the unconvincing humbleness which is not able to escape talking in words of power. Yet it is an important book for raising awareness about the beingness and intelligence of non-humans and how to coexist with them. The enemy is not the technology itself, but rather inequality and centralization of power and knowledge, and that the answer to these threats are education, diversity, and justice.